Welcome to Inside Games Daily, the only gaming news show brave enough to drag Concord out of the grave.
That's right, we just laid those bones to rest. But no, this is for forensics. We're exhuming so that we can learn lessons for the future, right? Or more accurately, hope that PlayStation has learned the right lessons for the future.
Boy, we'll see. Sony Studio Business Group CEO Herman Hulst briefly addressed PlayStation's biggest flop, Concord, in a recent fireside chat with other Sony executives, reported by 80LV.
Though brief, Hulst's comments indicate that PlayStation may not have learned the right lessons when it comes to games as service games.
Yep, which is doubly concerning as we supposedly head toward the release of Marathon, yet another games as a service that has not quite captivated audiences yet.
Yeah, I think a lot of folks, myself included, would like to see some pivot or spark or maybe even a delay to Marathon, but it doesn't seem like it's in the cards.
So for starters, Herman Hulst insists Concord's failure hasn't shaken their resolve, stating that PlayStation remains, quote, very committed to building a diverse and resilient live service portfolio. Boy, that sounds great, huh, guys? Video games?
Oh, yeah. The exec you speak is only going to get thicker and more eye-rolly as we go on. But part of that's owing to the nature of this video and the intended audience, which is not us. But that's what makes games media so fun. In that point, though, about the robust and resilient live service portfolio, Hulst cites MLB The Show, Destiny 2, and Helldivers 2 as examples of games that express the virtues that they are looking for.
Yeah, and here's a fun little piece of this, which I kind of suspected, but it's good to hear. Herman Hulst shared that microtransactions now make up more than half of Helldiver 2's revenue. More than half.
Well, that's probably what you'd like to see as games as service goes on and matures, maybe is the term. I guess that's compared to just people buying the game outright. But Hulst's comments reflecting on Concord's failure feel like they don't really strike at the heart of that particular issue.
But ultimately, that title entered into a hyper-competitive segment of the market. I think it was insufficiently differentiated to be able to resonate with players.
All right, so as a result, Hulst says they have reviewed internal processes to, quote, deeply understand how and why that title failed to meet expectations to ensure we're not going to make those same mistakes again.
All right, so internal processes will solve this, I guess. Like we said, we need to look at the context of these comments a little bit. This is, we can assume, meant to assure investors that Marathon will not be the same failure that Concord was.
Although Hulst's comments on Marathon are likewise unconvincing. Here they are.
We're taking all the lessons learned. We're using the capabilities that we've built in analytics and user testing to understand how audiences are engaging with the title. And some of that feedback, frankly, has been varied, but it's super useful. That's why you do these testing. And the constant testing and the constant revalidation of assumptions that we just talked about, to me, is just so valuable to iterate and to constantly improve the title. So when launch comes, we're going to give the title the optimal chance of success.
Also then concluded his thoughts on Marathon with another bout of thick execu-speak saying, quote, we're committed to continuing to leverage our learnings to maximize engagement and player satisfaction throughout the life cycle of the title.
I love listening to these people describe video games. It's just like, man, what a nightmare. And it's so funny because I don't think we do this show, just as an aside, we do Inside Games because of these exact quotes. We try to translate these quotes to people that don't want to talk like this about video games. They want to talk like, oh, a video game is fun, or a video game has this cool game mechanic or cool story. Like, Herman Hulst doesn't give a shit about that. He only cares about money. And you can see it in the way he's talking about it.
Absolutely, yeah. All these comments are directed towards investors who just want to know that in the future they won't be burning money like they have. A lot of the explanations given, they're tuned to ensure investors that future projects will be profitable. The comments aren't really made to assure players like you and me that future projects will be fun and good.
the words we want to hear.
Yeah, right?
Yeah. That said, it's not reassuring to hear Herman Hulst say their silver bullet is just testing the game a lot. That's bad.
Yeah, it also feels a little late in the game for testing an iteration to air quotes solve what seems to be the fundamental problem. And if we use Hulst's own reasoning here, it even doesn't add up. The market is still just as competitive as it was when Concord launched, if not even more so.
Similarly, Marathon seems insufficiently differentiated to other shooter games as service. It really does. I mean, when I played it, it was not. I will say, like I've said over and over, I enjoyed it, but it wasn't differentiated. There wasn't much different to it. It was just an extraction shooter.
It's a bit weird that Holst references these improved internal processes to, rigorously guide these projects. Whereas we know, like, Marathon's probably way too late in the game to have even been affected by those processes that have been revised since Concord came out. So he's doing his best to reassure investors, but I'm not sure I'm feeling it.
All right, let's move on to some other bits that are not necessarily good as well from this fireside chat. First, they raised the price of PlayStation Plus because they made it better or whatever. I don't know.
Their reasoning for that was they increased the value that they deliver to customers, and that they'll continue to revise the price of PlayStation Plus according to their strategy, something. So, long story short, essentially, they could raise the price because they can get away with it. And if players are feeling like it's worth it, then they can raise the price, and that's kind of where it sorts out too. They also addressed the Switch 2, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, they're not worried about Switch 2 because the PlayStation 5 is more powerful and offers a better TV play experience, which is, I guess, technically true.
Yeah, it's true. They claim that the PS5 has a wider range of software than Switch 2. I mean, if you're just looking at Switch 2, that's absolutely true, but there's all the Switch 1 stuff. Anyway, they say that they also reference this a bit, investment in the player's relationship with the brand. They kind of brought it up in many ways without saying it, but essentially they have a lot of PlayStation super fans out there, and they think that nurturing that fandom will lead to long-term loyalty that will overpower other entrants trying to get close to the PlayStation crown, essentially.
Yeah, an example given is adapting PlayStation brands into anime, which the kids and teens love. Lawrence, this talk, by the way, makes me very, very worried. Whenever they're like, oh, well, everybody's loyal to us, so we're never going to lose another customer. Like, as soon as companies start feeling that and feeling overconfident, that is usually the beginning of the end. Not fully the end, but it's like maybe a little downswing for Sony. So be aware that if you are a Sony fanboy, you are being talked about like that.
Yeah, there were a couple of instances like that in this fireside chat where it did, like, PlayStation as a brand almost explicitly referenced their own laurels as the reason that they would not fail in the future. For example, they bring up their operational excellence a lot, which is a vague term that essentially is like, that's what an executive says when the people under them make awesome stuff that they don't quite understand. I'm not saying that's what's happening here, but what I was hoping to get out of this fireside chat, aside from dirt about Concord, was some, like, actual tactical information about how they're going to run the business. They did say that they trimmed margins pretty hard, that they're hawking on game budgets a lot, so they're trimming back their spend. So they want to increase margin, spend less, and also increase revenue. So they want to do both at the same time. But as far as how they're going to do that, they basically said our processes and also our brand, and that's a little concerning to me.
Yeah, I also, as a customer, don't like being talked about that way. That is not something that I'm like. They're like, we already have your money. Like, I don't like to hear that because I'm like, well, not necessarily. You don't always already have my money. I'm not a Sony fanboy. I know there are a lot of people are, and they have a PlayStation. That's their only console, and they're going to stick to it. They're going to stick to whatever game they release, and the next AAA game they release is theirs. And I don't know if I want to feel like that as somebody who has to spend money on Sony.
Yeah, I agree. I think with Concord and also Marathon, you see a company that's not used to convincing people to play their game. It's mostly like, we made it, it's amazing, and just based on our pedigree, you're going to understand that and come to this product. So when it came to the marketing or the demonstrations for Concord and Marathon, I don't see a whole lot of ability to convince people to come somewhere they're not already at. And I think games as service is a place not a lot of people want to go. So yeah, we'll see if they can right the ship. What I think we have seen, I did bring up margin a little bit. I think we have seen the results of that, but unfortunately increasing margin or reducing costs is laying people off, and Bungie has done that a lot. And also there was that rumor about canceling paid marketing. That could be another factor of Sony looking at the books, or PlayStation, sorry, I keep interchanging the two. PlayStation looking at the books and saying, well, we've already invested this much into this game. We need to keep an eye on margins because money not spent is essentially money earned, and now they're just like really trimming back on the spend. But is that going to help a game get off the ground? You kind of have to market something new. So this is a weird. I don't see the puzzle pieces all locking together here. The only explanation that I can come across is that Sony has switched into cost-saving mode with Marathon, and their internal processes are now going to take effect on the games they haven't already announced and are sort of obligated to release. So they can't say that, though. They can't say we're just waiting to flush Marathon and move on. So they're trying to do this like double speak to make investors feel good about it. But it sure does seem to me that they're just sort of like, they're not attrition.
Triage, maybe?
There, okay. Yeah, that's it. Then maybe there's a handful of games from their games of service push that now they have to triage out because they've made some incorrect assumptions about the market.
Lawrence, I think you're right on in the sense that they don't want to talk about Concord this way too. So they're saying, "Oh, the mistake was, it was the market was too competitive." And when Herman Hulst can't come out and just shit on the development team and be like, "Well, that was a bad video game," because it was a bad video game. So like, it's kind of one of those things where like, I can weirdly sort of side with Herman Hulst on this. Maybe he's trying to be diplomatic. And maybe not shit on the people that have been laid off or the studio shut down. Maybe. I don't know. I feel like it would be a bad look as a CEO to do that, to shit on your own employees, especially after the fact, after they're all long dead. So that might be the reason why they're like, it was an overly competitive market. Because behind closed doors, he's got to be like, we gave them $400 million. They spent 5 years on this thing and it was bad. So he might just chalk it up to the personnel there behind closed doors, but then in the public be like, it was a bad market.
Yeah, I agree. This whole video is very diplomatic in that way. I mean, it's a fireside chat, but also it kind of sounds like executives hitting talking points in an investor call. I've listened to a lot of those. Similar energy in the room, where yeah, if Herman Hulst slags off Concord, he's slagging off himself because that project also occurred under his watch. So he has a vested interest in making himself and his company look, mature and like they always make the right decisions. And whoops, this whole thing came out of left field. So yeah, I agree, Bruce, though. I think the heart of the matter might be PlayStation's not necessarily used to competing in this level. They make best-in-class, tent poles, the word they would use, single-player experiences. And I think the raw value and expertise in producing those kind of exempted them from having to compete, blow for blow with other games in the field. But now they're launching games as service games, and those are not. They don't appear to be, marks of quality higher, so much higher that you can't avoid them. You have to play them, and they're the best. Not quite like that. You can say no thanks to Concord pretty easily, and I feel like the same might be true of Marathon. We'll see when we get there. I'm really excited to see how, or if even PlayStation tries to congeal a marketing message around it to tell people why it is sufficiently differentiated from other extraction shooters or even other service shooters.
I also want to get ahead of the comments on this one. Helldivers 2 is one of the best-in-class live service games, and Sony did publish that at least. Arrowhead obviously made it, but Sony published it. So I will say credit where credit is due there for Helldivers 2, which is an amazing live service video game that Sony published, and I'm sure had a hand in along the way. So for one success, they have 3 failures or whatever.
That's true. Yeah, their processes are not entirely busted. I think it's more down to the investment of the developers and the expertise involved in executing those games versus PlayStation's internal process cranking out nothing but hits. Speaking of hits, both now and in the future, it's time for Lawrence's Preview Corner. I went to Summer Games Fest, played a handful of games, and now I'm here to tell you about them. This one is Wuchang Fallen Feathers. You'd be forgiven for looking at this and thinking that it's exactly like Black Myth. It's, I'm not going to say one way or the other, it's similarities, but if you're a Souls-like enjoyer, and especially if you like fast and difficult Souls-like games, this one is for you. Here, all the mainstays are here. You play as a character who has been cursed right away, right off the top, by something called the feathering. So now you have a partial feathery arm, but that also means that the game's kind of distant and ghostly NPCs all treat you as though you're a leper. There's an inevitability about it. The feathering is going to consume you and turn you into a monster, but it's, for some reason with you, it's just a little bit slower, and instead you get superpowers for a little bit. But yeah, you run around in an open world, you go to shrines, you rest at them to recharge your heals and bring back all the enemies. The mechanics are where this game differentiates itself quite a bit, though. So the game kind of revolves around stacks of heavenly might. I can't remember the exact phrase. There were a lot of terminologies getting thrown around. But essentially, if you dodge at the last second, if you dodge with just timing, you'll get a stack that you can then spend on a move, a special move of some kind. And every weapon has its own technique button that does something different. So essentially, I ran around the open world a little bit, but then the demo handler was essentially like, hey, if you want, we got 2 bosses you can try. You can run around the open world, the full demo if you want, or you can try some of these ridiculous bosses. So I ran around for a bit. I was like, hey, load me up to a boss. So there was one boss. It was a pretty simple like pattern learning recognition thing. Beat it pretty short order. And then they loaded up the second boss, and I got plenty of warnings about this. The guy was like, how comfortable would you say you are with Souls games? Was the first question. And I was like, oh, I think I'm all right. But he was like, okay, well, we've had people that say they platinum an Elden Ring and they still got their ass beat by this thing. And I can attest to that. This second boss was no joke. I was loaded up with a particular build. And here's kind of the neat thing about it. I had 2 weapons, but I really had time to figure out how one of them worked. The first one was a sword that had a parry move on like the left trigger. So this boss in the first phase was just doing like sword attacks, and those I could parry. But then when it got into phase 2, suddenly there started to be these like magic water attacks mixed in with the combo, in addition to just like kicks and punches that I also could not parry. So then it became a game of like parrying the moves that I can parry and then dodging at the last second the moves that I can't, which was really cool. Essentially, like if I got enough of these stacks, then I could use a spell that like raised my defense for a while, which helped me stay in the game. Or you can do offensive spells or use them on attacking moves. There was another weapon I had, or the sword that I had would turn into like a whip, and I could burn stacks on doing like a big whip attack, which I would do whenever I got a knockdown or anything like that. What I think is super cool about this, in addition to how challenging and fast it is that you can swap back and forth between the weapons in a combo flow. So if you're attacking and you have a stack of whatever it is, you can click the left stick and you'll swap to your next weapon while doing an attack. So essentially you can flow between these 2 different weapons, and there are 2 associated special abilities. So let's say that I'm doing this fight, I'm on the sword, I can parry the sword attacks, but then I know the combo well enough to swap in the middle of that string to something else, like something that has like a dodge and attack or a slip move, so that when the boss stops hitting me with the sword, which I can parry, then I can swap to something that can effectively deal with the water magic or even the hand-to-hand combat and stuff like that. And even the weapons themselves have a whole upgrade tree that changes the properties about the techniques they have, or the way that they generate these stacks that you then use on abilities or spells. So that's kind of what I think is really cool about this game. It reminds me of Nioh in that regard. Nioh felt like you could string together your own combat style, flowing through these different weapons and stances. This feels like the Nioh system, but applied more to the wide character build aspect of a Souls game. You can equip 2 weapons that you want that have like interlocking abilities or play off of each other really well. And then I think that gives you a little more authorship over how your character plays, and especially the tools I think that you have to deal with these bosses. So I got my ass kicked by this boss for like 45 minutes straight. I eventually beat it. I was told I was the 4th person at the entire Summer Game Fest to beat it. So your gamers out there putting up numbers and impressing the audience. No clapping though, no cheering. I must not have heard it because, you know, brain was awash with chemicals of victory, but aside from just the gameplay intricacy, it's a very good looking game. The environments are really lush and vibrant. The bosses look cool and like transform, and you have a variety of like monster bosses, and then the super hard boss I fought, she was just this like martial arts phenom that had water magic. So it was just this cool lady in a dress that just beat the shit out of me relentlessly. So I'm into it. I'm into explore, and also just like the little spice, little pepper on top of it, establishing itself, I think, as a mega hard Souls game in a genre that itself is actually quite difficult, I think will appeal to a lot of people. Just as an aside, Steph was telling me that she was in a marketing meeting, and there's a new term for people that like games like this. Masochist gamers, the ones that seek out these very difficult games. So if you are a masochist gamer, Wuchang Fallen Feathers is for you. The game is, let's see here. It's coming from developer Lenzi, published by 505 Games. It's launching on July 24th, so just over a month away for PlayStation 5, PC, and Xbox Series.
Firm handshakes all around for beating that boss. Nicely done. That was, I'm sure that was not very easy to do, especially at Summer Game Fest, by the way. Kind of hard with the crowd around, and there's a bunch of bullshit happening, so nicely done. We'd also like to thank John Morgan-Glardy and Jack Willis for supporting the Inside Games Patreon, number 1, and number 2, being the only 2 players left in Concord, even though I don't think Concord is even up and running anymore.
Hey, as long as the PS5 is on, the dream stays alive.